There are two ways to look at any historical event: coincidental and conspiratorial. One is to see a whole mess of coincidences that just happen to fit together. A lot, maybe most of the world's events are just like that. People make choices. Those choices have consequences, and those consequences affect other events further down the road, leading to a major event. It is just a coincidence that they occurred in any particular order. The other way is to see connections between events that just might have had a finger, so to speak, pushed on the side of the scale to tip things in one direction. This view sees two sides to many situations and two different outcomes each side is rooting for. As Christians, we know about one great conspiracy. The devil and his angels want to keep people out of the kingdom of God. And they'll do anything to achieve it. The devil's goal, as stated in the Bible, is one world kingdom, religion, and worship of Satan. The question for us today is, what can we learn about an event like the sinking of the Titanic? Whether you see a series of coincidences or connected events, I would like you to consider what I'm about to show you. A set of events that formed a perfect storm, so to speak, that changed the modern world from the day that it struck. Here is what I think is the simplest explanation of what really happened to the Titanic. I'll let you decide which view of history you think this falls into: coincidental or conspiratorial. Hi, I'm David Daniels from Chick Publications. There are two views on banking in the world. There are those who favor one big central bank. Nowadays, we call those people globalists. Then there are people who would rather not be under a single world power. We often call those people nationalists. The Titanic offered first-class accommodations for anyone who could afford it, globalist or nationalist, from the world's wealthiest down to the poor folks, such as those hoping for a better life in America. It was like a giant floating hotel that had something for everyone, from prince to peasant. On the globalist side were booked passengers like John Pierpont Morgan, who heavily favored and was pushing for a huge central bank. He was also the owner, loosely speaking, of the White Star Line, which means he owned Titanic. On the nationalist side were ticket holders like Jewish Benjamin Guggenheim and Isidor Straus, owner of Macy's, and White Star regular John Jacob Astor, the wealthiest man on the ship. Astor boarded in the French port of Cherbourg, but 55 rich men on the globalist side coincidentally all backed out at the last moment. J.P. Morgan, Morgan's business partner, ambassador to Paris, Robert Bacon, just a few days to go, chocolate king Milton Hershey, steel tycoon Henry Frick, and shipping and railroad magnate George Vanderbilt. J.P. Morgan tried to explain not getting on the boat, citing ill health, but he was later spotted in excellent health, along with his mistress. His art collection also coincidentally just missed the boat. All these would, coincidentally, benefit from a centralized bank and its amazing loans. A little more about the Astors. In Buffalo, New York in 1852, Charles Chinnicky, former Catholic priest, heard these words spoken by Catholic priests sent by the bishops of the United States. Quote, "Silently and patiently we must mass our Roman Catholics in the great cities of the United States, remembering that the vote of a poor journeyman, though he be covered with rags, has as much weight in the scale as the millionaire Astor, and that if we have 2 votes against his 1, he will become as powerless as an oyster. Or you could just kill him before he opposed your plan for a centralized bank, setting the world into a financial frenzy. But how would you bring this about? With the simplest of items, coal. Now, let's put together some historical events. Starting at the end of January 1912, the United Kingdom experienced a coal workers' strike. During a strike, people are not mining coal, so it's not easy to get coal to fill up the biggest coal-burning ship in the world, Titanic. Its coal bins were 3 stories high. It had 159 coal-burning furnaces. It burned up over 600 tons of coal each day. And that's only under normal conditions. If something were to happen, like say, more coal have to be burned because of slowing down and having to speed up again, that would increase the amount of coal burned, obviously. But there was another way to burn more coal. Piling coal 3 stories high put a lot of heat and pressure on that coal. And according to coal experts, spontaneous fires can start. And they can start pretty close to the time they were loaded into the ship, smoldering and increasing as oxygen is able to fan the flames, so to speak. According to those same coal fire experts, it could be burning for days or weeks before anyone would notice it. Did you know that there are coal fires in the world that have been burning for years underground? There are coal seams that are inaccessible and that burn untold amounts of coal because no one can put them out. But on a ship, you have a limited supply of coal. So what do? If you were right there in the port of, say, Southampton, on the south end of England, there were firefighting facilities that could have taken care of the whole thing rather rapidly. But the captain never called for them. Nor did he tell the ship's inspector about the fire. Instead, for some unknown reason, he chose to have 12 extra firemen deal with it while at sea. How would you do that? One method is to get someone shoveling as close as possible to where the fire is. Remember, it's really hot. To loosen up the burning parts, then they get those burning parts out and toss them into the boiler furnaces. That uses up extra coal. But there is the hope of eventually getting all the smoldering coals out of the bin. That was the procedure used on the Titanic. You see, one of those fires started in bunker number 10, boiler room 6, as many as 3 weeks before it was noticed. Remember that coal strike? It had ended just 4 days before Titanic docked at Southampton. Not enough time to get a bunch of new coal to refill the ship. That left the captain with few options. Along with the fact that some very wealthy people were boarding on the maiden voyage of a whole new type of luxury liner, and people did not like delays, there were all sorts of other pressures placed on this 26-year veteran captain of the White Star Line. The coal supply kept getting smaller and smaller. There was a long way to go to Cherbourg in France to get the rich folk, to Queensborough, now called Cobb, Ireland, for the poorer bulk of passengers, to the long journey across the Atlantic to America. The captain had to stretch the coal he had left all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. That would mean no slowing down. Once they got up to speed, about 22 to 23 knots per hour, takes a lot more coal to get going fast again. And it'll be a race against time to get that smoldering fire out, throwing that hot coal into the furnaces on top of the coal already there. That would explain why Captain Edward John Smith ignored all notices about those ice fields up ahead. He'd gotten at least 3 warnings himself. But Captain Smith foolishly trusted in the Titanic, of which an official of the White Star Lines commented at its launch a year before, May 31st, 1911, "Not even God himself could sink the ship." I doubt that God was impressed. There were certain things that Captain Smith didn't know. In a huge project like Titanic, there are engineers and there are penny pinchers. If you ask an engineer to make a coffee thermos that will keep a person warm in Antarctica, he or she will do it. It will cost thousands of dollars, but a freezing person in a blizzard will get a steaming cup of coffee. It will have every protection known to mankind. It will work. My hat's off to engineers. But the penny pinchers, they seem to take the greatest pleasure in saying no. No, we can't afford that. No, you use this cheaper material, not that more expensive one. And so it was with Titanic. Records show that the engineers picking a super strong steel that should withstand all sorts of problems. Don't forget, engineers made icebreaker boats that literally cut their way through ice. It isn't a problem if they use the right materials. But the penny pinchers wouldn't let them use that super strong steel. They said, no, you use regular steel that we tell you. And grumbling under their breath, you'll be sorry, they're forced to use the cheaper steel. And that's what they did to Titanic. Big mistake. Captain Smith didn't know that. He thought they'd just plow through anything with that super steel, full speed ahead, maybe make it to New York before their supply of coal ran out. Yes, he was worried, but he trusted his ship. Maybe too much. Because that inferior steel had been superheating against the starboard, the right side, for days, and according to experts, up to 3 weeks, and weakened a line so clearly it could be seen on photographs that were only discovered in the last decade. The photos were taken on April 2nd, the very day that Titanic was tested for 12 hours for seaworthiness, and at 8 p.m. sent from Belfast down to Southampton to get its first passengers. Some would think, a coal fire? How could that be a problem? They could just put it out like any fire. Actually, no. Think about this. There were 160 firemen, people who took the coal from the bins and shoveled it into the boilers on that ship when it arrived in Southampton. 152 of those 160 men got off. Only 8 stayed on the ship for the voyage. Natives from around Southampton who didn't know about the fire took their place. And according to later testimony, they never did get that fire out themselves. What did it? The cold waters of the Atlantic after hitting that iceberg. So yeah, I think maybe it was serious. Aside from the firefighters, 12 of whom were set to nothing else but trying to put out that fire 24/7, almost no one else knew or alerted the passengers to that fire. And almost no one knew about the inferior steel on the hull and all over the Titanic. Not even the captain knew, as I said. So no one knew they were headed towards disaster. I hope a good number of those men, women, and children were saved. They had no idea that on April 15th, their souls would be required of them, as Jesus said. Jesus shed his precious blood to pay for all their sins. All we have to do is trust in his finished work and not ourselves, anyone or anything else, admitting we're sinners and accepting his sacrifice for us, asking forgiveness. And we're saved. All by that simple childlike act of faith. If they did this, those people were in heaven way before they expected it. For the rest, first, it was very cold. Then, it was very hot. But I think there is more to this than meets the eye even now. Let me tell you about Francis Brown. Francis was but a child when his mother died. When he was a teen, his father died as well, leaving him an orphan. His uncle took him in and became his guardian. His uncle, Robert Brown, was bishop of the town of Cloyne in County Cork, Ireland. Francis decided he wanted to become a Jesuit. But his uncle wanted him to see Europe first, bought Francis a camera and sent him across Europe. Francis loved photography. He became quite good at it too. In his last year of Jesuit formation, before being ordained a Jesuit priest, Bishop Brown bought a first-class ticket for Francis from Southampton, England, up to Queenstown, or Cobb, in Ireland, for that last stop of the Titanic before sailing across the Atlantic. He also gave him special letters of introduction so they would let this young Jesuit take pictures all over the ship, and he did. A rich American family liked Francis. They offered to buy a ticket all the way to New York. He asked for permission by telegraph. The Jesuit provincial was adamant. He replied, "Get off that ship." Provincial. Get off that ship. That telegram saved his life. But unusual words, aren't they? Get off that ship. Why? Something wrong with it? Did the Jesuit provincial know something? That brings me to the final thoughts. If you see history as random coincidences, as surely a lot of it is, then none of this makes you stop and think. But if you see some things might be conspiracies, add up these simple points. 1, the coal strike meant no quick replenishing of coal once it was used up. 2, the information seems to indicate that the fire started very soon after the coal was placed into the 3-story high coal bins. 3, the fire was near the bottom of the bunker, which means it would not be discovered for 3 weeks according to the coal fire experts. 4, that fire weakened the inferior steel hull in the exact place where the iceberg hit. This is according to the firemen's own testimonies. And they were there, in boiler number 6. 5, the rip that it caused and the temperatures warped important parts of that watertight casing. 6, all that made more than 4 compartments fill up with water, which was too much for the Titanic to bear. The ship went down in only 15 minutes after that. 7, the people who would soon benefit from the globalist bankers and their central bank and Federal Reserve canceled their reservations at the last minute. 8, the people who opposed a central bank, blissfully unaware of any problems, boarded the ship. 9, the world went into financial panic after these people died, and the central bank was soon born, moving toward the Roman Catholic goal of one world government to be ruled by one world religion. In light of that, do you think that just maybe someone tipped the scales a bit by sending a little flame into the bottom of that coal bunker? I will leave you to decide. God bless you and have a wonderful day.